It's about time you showed up. It's not like my only purpose is to hang out waiting for you all. I mean, I do have places to go, people to haunt. But seeing how you got here so late, I'm gonna have to make these stories extra scary. Let's just call it the lateness tax. First up, we have one from an OP that when she was 8, she got a new playmate. It's called, Who is this lady?
I don't know if this actually happened because I'm the only one who still remembers it. People keep telling me that I'm crazy or lying, but I know what I experienced. I'm still young, but this happened when I was 8, and my cousin was 7. We were pretty close back then and having a sleepover at my house. At the time, I lived in an apartment with just my mom. My aunt had recently moved out, so we had a spare room that was going to be mine soon. Back then, I still slept with my mom because I was afraid of the dark. My cousin and I were playing until around 11 p.m. when my mom told us we had 30 more minutes to play. She said she was going to bed and made us promise not to open the door. We said okay because we were excited to keep playing. I don't know what time it was when this happened, but we saw a tall lady with black hair and red lips. She walked down the hall and came to us, then started playing with us. The hall she came from led to the storage closet. She started talking to us about random things, like what we liked, and even did fake doll voices. After a while, she told us we needed to open the door to let her out. We said we couldn't because my mom had told us not to. Then, my cousin looked at me and said, "She looks a bit like Mel." Mel is our older cousin who was about 4 years older than us. I agreed, but then suddenly, the lady was gone. We tried to find her and opened the hall storage room, which makes a loud noise. This woke up my mom, and she was mad that we were still awake. She told us it was around 2 a.m., the latest we had ever stayed up as kids. She made us go to sleep right after that. In the morning, my cousin and I talked about it, but when we told my mom, she was confused. She said there was no lady and that the door was still locked. However, I noticed the top lock wasn't locked, even though the bottom one was. My mom insisted she hadn't locked the top one and brushed it off as nothing. To this day, I don't know if that's true or not, but I still remember everything so clearly. I remember the dolls we played with and the show we were watching. It's been about 10 years since that night, and I still live in the same apartment. Sometimes I feel like there's something near me, but I don't want it to be true or for it to be anything bad.
No worries. Just because you're the only one that remembers it doesn't mean you're wrong. Maybe you just have a better memory. Next, we have one from a mother that says, "Weird things happening in my house."
So let me preface this by saying that I don't think my house is haunted. We purchased it in 2022 and have only had about 3 or 4 occurrences. I wrote a post last year about my deceased grandma checking in on my 2-year-old daughter who's named after her. That being said, I do believe that we have family members who are around us from time to time. This past weekend, I was up in the living room with my 6-week-old son. He was super fussy and hadn't slept yet. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. I kept hearing things moving around in the kitchen, but every time I would go to check and see what fell or got kicked over, nothing would be out of place. Our small dog was asleep under the bassinet, and our big dog was in the bedroom with my husband at this time, so it wasn't the pups. It kept happening for the rest of the early morning and almost sounded like footsteps, but I kind of just brushed it off, no big deal. The baby ended up finally sleeping about 7 a.m., and I did as well. Fast forward to tonight, I was home alone with my son and my daughter, who's 3 now. She was playing, and I noticed she walked up to a long, skinny table where I keep family pictures. She was babbling on about, "Mom, I saw her, she came to see me," and I really didn't think much of it and just said, "Cool baby." There's lots of pictures over there. That's when I looked up and noticed she was pointing to a picture from Christmas in 2022 with my husband's family. She was pointing at his Mamu, who passed away in 2023. She was only 12 months old in the picture, so I really doubt that she remembered her. I was a little spooked, so I asked her again, "What do you mean?" And she told me she saw her, and she came through her door. I've always believed in the paranormal, and I find it comforting that Mamu came to visit her.
Wait a second. Let me get this straight. You don't think your house is haunted because you've only had 3 or 4 occurrences. So how many occurrences does it take for you to consider your house haunted? Our next one comes from someone that had a weird experience at work that may have saved his life. It's called, "If a spirit didn't scream at me, I could have been hurt."
Now, I've never been a spiritual person, really. However, years ago when I was 16, I was doing work experience in a bird sanctuary farm. It was a big place, shut for the winter. There were 3 of us working that day, me, the boss, and a volunteer. My boss told me he was going to pick his kids up from school, and the volunteer had left early, so I'd be there by myself for half an hour. He said while he was gone to change the bird feeders. Simple job, no problem. Except, one bird feeder was drilled into a barn to which I had to climb a wall with an 8-foot drop to reach. It's pretty much a tragic accident waiting to happen, but this time we had inches of snow, and the brick wall was very icy. I got onto the wall and balanced while walking across carefully to the bird feeder. About a few steps in, this incredibly loud male voice screamed, "Get down!" It made me jump, but I awkwardly laughed and apologized thinking it was my boss. Only thing was, I could see the car park from there, and his car was gone. It couldn't have been the volunteer, as she had also gone home, and of course was a woman, where that was very much a male voice. I got down and looked around trying to find the source of the sound. Nothing, no one. I even let out a cliché, "Hello?" I searched all the acres, and still the same result. I thought back to where the voice was coming from. It seemed like it was right in front of me, someone shouting right in my face. When my boss got back, I asked him was there anyone else here too, which he said no. I didn't tell him what happened because I didn't want to seem crazy. I have only told a few people about this, my one and only possibly paranormal experience, none of which have believed me. I don't blame them. I just think and almost cringe about what would have happened if I didn't hear that voice.
Well, it sounds like that spirit was a true hero. I mean, all he needs is a red cape and he'd be all set. Well, it's almost that time again, isn't it? Time to wrap it up. But before we go, I think I'll be an extra generous ghost host tonight and give you one more story. There's this group of kids that go off into the woods to play soldier, and well, they sort of get an extra player. It's called Something in the Woods.
Hey everyone, I've never posted on here, but I wanted to share a story that actually happened to me. This story has been pretty hard for me to talk about, as it was one of the freakiest moments of my life. I also really just wanted some input on the situation, to be honest. This happened around March of 2020 or 2021. I believe I was 17 at the time. One of my friends was visiting from out of town, and we had gotten really into airsoft. Anyway, the neighborhood I lived in at the time had a large area of undeveloped land just up the street. It was full of pine trees and whatever, and was a few miles long and wide. We used to play airsoft up there all the time and just called it the woods. So me and my friend, we'll call him Christian, devised a plan to invite a large group of my high school friends to the woods and play hide and seek. The only catch was me and Christian were going to dress up in camo and ghillie suits and shoot our friends with airsoft just to mess around with them. So, me and Christian got dressed up. He was wearing a tan ghillie suit, mask and all, and I was wearing camo BDU's black mask and a weird mesh tan camo sheet tied around me like a poncho. We ended up finding a ditch in the woods close to the edge of my neighborhood and set up our first spot. Our plan was to move from spot to spot throughout the night while avoiding my group of friends. By the time we were prepared, it was around 6 p.m. and the sun was beginning to set. We waited about 30 minutes and kept hearing branches snapping, pine cones falling, footsteps, etc. We chalked it up to woods noises at the time. We waited until about 7, and then we got the text that the group of guys had arrived and were ready to look for us. For reference, they had no idea we were wearing camo and all that, so we sent some stupid cryptic text back like, "Come and find us. We can see you," among other things. We began hearing the guys running around and hid in our first spot. This continued for a while, but as time progressed, my friends were starting to get really close to us while they were looking. So we decided to move to our second spot. We got up and moved spots. The way the woods were set up was north and south of the woods was about 5 miles of just trees, where east was about 4 miles, and west was only a couple hundred yards. The west side also faced the main highway next to my neighborhood. So me and Christian walked to the west side and then south into the woods, hugging the perimeter of the trees. We walked for some time, keeping an eye on my friends who had no idea where we were. We ended up coming up on the super deep trench in the back of the woods. We peered in and saw it was about 15 feet down and pretty steep. So we slid into the trench and waited at the bottom. After a few minutes, it was pitch black. Christian ended up realizing he left his glasses at our first spot. He had taken them off to wear his ghillie suit mask. So he said he was going to quickly run back and grab them, then immediately come back. I was obviously kind of hesitant, but I agreed and he took off. I waited for probably 15 minutes and started hearing some commotion. I could hear my friend saying something along the lines of, "I saw someone. They're running. How are they so fast?" I figured Christian had probably gotten caught, so I was getting ready to give up, until I suddenly heard someone baseball slide into the trench on the opposite side of me. Keep in mind this trench was about 15 feet deep and 45 feet long, so I couldn't see the other side without walking over. I assumed Christian had slid in and escaped from my friends because I heard them running somewhere else. I started calling out to Christian, but I didn't get a response. I ended up getting a little annoyed and said something like, "What the hell are you doing?" As soon as I said that, a stick flew out of the darkness and landed right in front of me. I was pretty confused and kept calling out for Christian until I heard whatever was on the other side of the trench start moving. I heard leaves rustling and what sounded like someone's knee pops or something. I paused and stopped talking. I waited a few more seconds, and whatever was on the other side started taking very deliberate heavy steps. Slow and heavy. I figured it was one of my friends trying to freak me out, so I took one of the airsoft we brought and switched it to full auto. I fired a few bursts into the darkness, figuring whoever or whatever was would yell or something, but the steps just kept coming. At this point, I was more confused than afraid, so I grabbed my stuff and climbed out of the trench. I once again ran to the western perimeter of the forest and eventually got caught by all the guys. We laughed about it for a while, but one of my friends ended up asking me, "How did you change so fast?" I was obviously confused and asked him what he meant. He explained that him and the group saw someone who was really skinny and tall running around the woods. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and was probably 175 pounds. At the time, they all kind of gave me a weird look when I told them I had been wearing the camo and poncho all night. I ignored it and went to find Christian. I walked a ways and found him shining a small flashlight in the direction of the trench I was in prior. He jumped when I walked up to him and said, "What the hell?" I apologized for scaring him, but he stopped me. "How did you get over here so quickly?" I once again asked what he meant, and he said that he saw someone peering from behind a tree just behind the trench, literally while I was in the process of getting caught. My heart sank a little bit, but we assumed someone from the group was messing with us. We ended up meeting the group and did a roll call, but everyone that was invited was there. Christian and I started explaining what we had saw, and the entire group explained they saw a really tall and skinny silhouette sprinting around the woods. They assumed it was me due to the build. We ended up walking to the tree where Christian saw the silhouette. He pointed to where the head and shoulder of the silhouette was behind the tree, but the spot where the head was literally probably 8 feet off the ground. Everyone got really quiet, and we decided to quickly leave the woods. It wasn't until we had exited the woods and gotten onto the street that led to my house that Christian and I paused and looked into the woods. We waited a few seconds, heard what sounded like the prop hunt whistle from deep in the woods. We obviously freaked out and quickly got back to my house, where I told my parents. It's been years since then, but I still get freaked wondering what the hell happened, and what would have happened if I stayed in the trench longer. I've told a bunch of people this story, but everyone thinks I'm lying. You guys are just gonna have to take my word for it.
Well, I don't know what your problem is. I mean, you went out into the woods to play soldier, and you ended up playing a live version of Ghost Recon. Well, that's it for another night. But before you leave, could you do me a little favor? Could you please hit like, subscribe, and sharing this video? It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, or have any thoughts about our stories tonight, or if you have any suggestions on subjects for upcoming videos, or even just general thoughts about my channel, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares.